Okay, so I'll do mine now. I'll do my idea. So my idea is called New Neighbours. It is a game where it's a team of 4 versus 2. You can pick between 2 teams of either 2 adults or 2 like children. All on separate. It's the level design is going to be a garden split between the middle, so it's 2 neighbours, hence the name. And you're just going to be fighting each other, throwing things over the fence, stuff like that. I'll go into more detail of what things you'll be throwing, obviously, later. But the target audience will be a Peggy 12, because there will be some violence, obviously cartoony. We're not going to have, realistic rocks being thrown at kids. we don't want that. But that also falls into some research that I did where, similar to what Brandon said, Ben said,
I'm also
where the most popular age range is like 15 to 24. So I think 12 will fit in there quite well. So I think 72% of that age range have played video games, but I'll be mainly aiming for the 15 to 19-year-olds, as I think it will be. The comedic aspects will fall nicely between those age ranges. Target platform, I will be aiming for console, but I'll first upload on PC, as a lot of games, it's quite hard to get an indie game that is like brand new to go straight on a console, whereas as a lot of indie games have went on PC, usually with Steam or Epic Games or things like that, to then transition to a console game. So if that's popular on Steam, it will turn into a console game, which is what I'm aiming for. You'll have controller integration, things like that, so it will sort of push it towards that console target. So the art style I'm going for, as again, it's going to be a 12, and you're going to be throwing stuff at people, cartoony people. That's the art style I'm going to go for. So sort of lowish poly, cartoony, very bright, very it's very similar to the game Overcooked, that sort of art style. So people are going to be very basic, head, blob body, and some arms. It's about it, because it's going to be a similar viewport as well. So you can be over the top of them, looking down. So it's more of like an arcade party-ish game. That's what I'm sort of aiming for. I'll go into more detail about the level design. So, as I said, it's going to be split into 2 gardens, 2 separate gardens, 2 houses. Probably not separate. It would be one house. I can't remember what it's called. Semi-detached house. Is that what it's 2 houses together? I think that's what it's called. It's a semi-detached house. Garden in the back. The items that you can throw will be mainly on the side where the 4 players will be, the 4 children will be. So then I want the game to start with them throwing stuff at the adults, them collecting things, chucking it back and that sort of back and forth. On that sort of to be the game flow, to be sort of that. So it you can always change it up with because I want it to be a multiplayer game. You can always do AI or things like that, but mainly a multiplayer game. I just want there to be stages, so there'll be the first stage where you spawn, and then there's the characters throwing stuff over at the adults in return. Then you that sort of back and forth, quite dodgeball-y, that sort of vibe. So I'm going to core mechanics, obviously movement, up, down, left, right, that sort of thing. Picking up items, throwing items, aiming. So for example, on the controller, you'll use a stick to look in a direction, and you'll have a line go forward to show how much you're going to throw it, so a power sort of thing. Lob it, throw a thing and over the fence or whatever. The game will have, so the win conditions will be the children can win by either defeating the adults by getting their health bar to 0 and then they run back in the house. We don't want people dying in a garden, so we then run back in the house, or damaging the house enough for them to go back. So you can chuck stuff at the house, and that will sort of be as a separate health bar. The adults win by just getting rid of all the kids, really. So throwing stuff at them, get their health bar down enough to then run back inside. As again, we don't want kids being knocked out by rocks. As that wouldn't be very nice. Unique would be, it's 4v2 sort of team setup, as not a lot of games have unfair teams to begin with. Not unfair, it's balanced in different ways, but I'll talk about in a sec. So, as I said, 4 players on the child side, 2 players on the adult side, balanced in that sort of way, so it'll fit that. Not a lot of games have that will usually be like 4 versus 4 or stuff like that. And the last new mechanic will be the character classes. So you'll have the adults will be the exact same, because they're quite powerful as most adults would be compared to children. But the children will have different. There's 4 characters, there's 4 players that you can pick from. So 1 on each team that you can pick from. And I'll try and see if I can find the thing on here. Here we go. So all the adults will be able to throw things quite quickly, quite easily, pick most things up. Whereas children differ, where you have, for example, there'll be a big character with a lot of health, very slow at aiming, slow at moving, but can pick up big items, like a large item, and chuck it, and it'll do a lot of damage, things like that. There'll be a small character that's quite fast, but can't pick up a lot of things, like a medium item or a small item. It can pick up fine, but not big items. A character that can carry a lot of items to provide to people, that can't really shoot very well. And then there's just the average character, which will just be, is okay at everything. The Mario in Mario Kart. good at most, not bad at anything really. So as I mentioned there'll be different items in different like class ranges. So there'll be large items which are like big stones or something, chairs, fence panels, bricks, that sort of thing. Things that you'd usually have 2 hands to hold. Medium items would be things that have 1 hand to hold but are quite heavy. It's like a rock, a toy, handled items like a rake or a broom or something. Then small items which would be like paper balls or like picking up dirt or things like that. Each with different damage types, each with like different types to like throw. So large items will take like longer to throw, short items will take less time. Competition, as I mentioned, it's got a very similar style, like art style and viewport to Overcooked. So that's what I think would be quite a competitor, as it's also a party game. Another one would be Fall Guys, as well as this, it's like a social competitive game. So you'll go on, you'll play with your friends, you'll talk and throw stuff at each other, which I think is quite similar to how you do in Fall Guys, with that sort of like peer-to-peer competitiveness where it's quite cartoony, so it's not too serious. Tell me some more competitive stuff. I can't really think. I'll be aiming to upload it on Steam. As I said, that's a good stepping point. And Steam has competitors like Epic Games and GOG. But I think Steam has its advantages with its early access things, where you can you can get people to playtest your game as you're developing it. So you can release like a map and a very limited like AI system and have people play it, see if they can find any bugs for you. So it means you haven't got to outsource, like, because we've got quite a small team, you haven't got to outsource a QA team, which I think would be quite useful. I'm trying to think if I've missed anything. I think that's about it. I think I haven't really missed anything. There's the pre-story, but it's just two neighbours throwing stuff at each other.
As you do.
Personally, I'd say your type of game as well would fit very well on mobile.
Yeah, I did think of mobile, but with the... Yeah, it would actually work very well.
Really
it has very limited. Yeah, it hasn't got a lot of buttons, as it. You could do that on a phone quite easily.
Yeah, I think it would also be really good on the Switch as well. So the one Joy-Con is.
That was one of the aims of just consoles in general. I think it would do well with. Yeah. But I do agree with it. The problem is with mobile is because of the viewport being quite zoomed out on a little phone like this, we won't be able to see it quite a lot. Especially because it's going to be landscape this way.
Like a bird's eye view?
Yeah, like a bird's eye view. So you won't be able to see a lot. So it's because I assume you'd play like that because of how long the map is rather than wide. It might be weird. You can always change it.
You could just make it so like on mobile it's just like the back garden rather than like you showing any of the house. You just zoomed in on the back garden. So like on the border it's just a fence.
Yeah.
And in the middle it's just like off to the end of a fence. And
you can just have the house like in the background and the camera's like on the end of the garden facing towards the house.
That's what the normal thing is. the problem with your one is an objective for the children is to break the house on the opposite side. So you need to you can always have it so you can just chuck in the direction you can't see, but that's not really obvious for players, is it?
But like if you're playing as a kid, you're not going to see much of that house anyway.
I mean, you could do like what Clash Royale do. You know, it's got like the 3 separate
the lanes.
Yeah. So you'd have like the house there. But then you did the stylized thing where the characters are a bit exaggerating, they look basically the same size as
that would work quite well actually.
Yeah.
Because then you could have the house this side and the garden split here. And that would work quite well.
So
the problem is that it'd be a very different game.
Yeah,
It'd be a completely different game. But it wouldn't take as long to create if because you could make the mobile one and use the same assets for the PC.
Oh
one.
yeah, of course, yeah.
Just change where it is a bit.
Is there any purpose for why they're buying things at each other?
Oh, okay. So the story. Thank you for listening. The story is these new neighbours, as the game's called, have moved in. These are the two adults. They moved into this nice house. They've bought this really nice house from home on the computer. Haven't really went there yet. So they go in there. It's all furnished. It's lovely. Yeah. They hear some, as I put all the stuff down, there's some screaming from next door. Bit of ruffians, you can say. So they go, oh, what's all this? Walk outside. Yeah. And then they see things being thrown at them. So if you had someone throw something at you, what would you do back? Throw something back. That's the story. Very simple. A lot of games like this would be very simple. Overcooked, you just cook things. That's really the story. There's not a lot of story for it because it's just an arcadey, fun little game to play with your friends or play online if you're bored. That's mainly the vibe. You don't really see the story really. You might show a cutscene if you have time with it. Yes. There you go.
Right, so I've got some questions, as you probably would have guessed.
Lovely.
The first one is similar to what Logan asked earlier with Jax, was how are you going to get round the thing about throwing things at kids?
So, I did think of this. So, as I said before, the win condition, you're not trying to kill children. You're trying to hit them enough so they're damaged and they run back inside to their parents or whatever. So you're not...
Could it be like a loss of energy? So to keep it in the theme of being in the garden, like throwing, I don't know,
tired.
like plants or ground and dirt, and it depletes their energy levels, so that they have to run back into the house.
I could, but then
as a way to get around.
I agree.
Chucking rocks at people.
We could get rid of the rocks.
any sort of like aggression or like violence towards kids is like morally wrong, isn't it? So it's like
I just love the wording though. It's like you're not trying to kill them, but you're trying to hit them enough.
Yeah, hit them enough.
About like water bombs or something?
Yeah, obviously, yeah.
Balloons or baskets.
yeah.
As a way to get around it, we could get rid of the rocks. That was just the initial thing I thought of.
Too dense.
Bit too dense rocks. Could just do dirt or water balloons and things like that.
Yeah.
You mentioned the kids have different classes. Can you play as the adults or the kids, or do you just have to pick the kids' side?
You can play as either or. So the plan is to pit. So it's like, Dead by Daylight, that game, you can play as a killer or the survivors. In the menu you would pick, I want to be an adult, I want to be a child, or I don't mind. Then it will matchmake you in that sort of way.
Yeah.
That's the plan.
The other follow-up question to that was, can you stack classes?
No.
So you mentioned the four, just having one of each.
It would be one of each, just so there's not because it's not like an Overwatch game with classes that you can that'll mess up the game. I want it to be balanced, so if there is any balancing issue, it's easier to fix than having to because someone could just be all for big buff person who can throw stuff really heavily, and that might be really really good compared to the normal every person each character, which I don't really want. So I prefer to have it as each separate character, just so it's easier to balance and mess with their sort of stats and what things they can do.
Okay. You mentioned throwing soil and stuff at each other. Would there be any kind of idea of having debuffs of some kind, so maybe temporarily slow the opposition down, or maybe help each other out, give each other buffs and stuff?
That would be a good idea. Yeah. That could always be added. I did think of having the character that can carry a lot of items, that would play as a support character. So I could always add more things to help that support character help the other players. So have items that debuffs, things like that. That would be a good idea.
Because you could have them as could you think about maybe having them unlocked, so instead of carrying 3 items, say that once they've reached a certain level they can carry 4, and etc.
The trouble with having things like that affect gameplay too much is you'll have a problem where you would have to have skill-based matchmaking, which would be quite difficult to do. Because I think Call of Duty does something like that, where when I play Call of Duty, I'm not very good at it. So I don't want to get into a game and have one awful weapon and have everybody else have the best thing, which I'm not a fan of. So I wouldn't want to implement that into a game that I'm a part of, because then you can have someone who's new be absolutely dominated by people who've played this game for a year. which I don't really feel is very welcoming to new players, which is what I think an arcade game should really do.
The final question that I've got anyway is, like, you mentioned about Fall Guys and you mentioned about different party games and stuff that you make comparisons to. But how will you make your game unique? Like, how will you make it stand out in that market? Because it's quite a big market at the moment. Like, what is the main kind of ISP, I guess? Like, what's the thing that makes it unique compared to the one?
Well, the things that make it unique is that it's a strict. It's more of a competitive game than like a Fall Guys, because it's you versus 100 people, which is competitive, yeah, but not. It's not in like a very contained space. So it's more of a. I'm trying to think of an example. Like a Clash Royale, that type of thing.
Yeah.
It's more like that, where it's you versus another team. So it's not. You can work as a team together and get a win. So it's a collaborative experience. Whereas Fall Guys, you're winning. And you get that person gets that sole enjoyment where everybody else is kind of annoyed that they didn't win. Whereas if you're part of a team of 4, if you win or lose, that's a group experience, which I think works better with these sort of social games, because then you can get into a group of 4 or a group of 2 of like friends and experience the game together and win when you win and lose when you lose, which I prefer.
Yeah, I do have. Sorry, I just had one more question. I was thinking that is how are you going to do it? Like, are you going to do it local? Kind of co-op game, or are you doing like internet based over online, and you're going to do like matchmaking stuff? Is that the plan for the short term? Or?
Long term, the plan is to do multiplayer, so online Steam players going against each other. But I think for the short term, in the months that we have to work on it, it would be a local co-op and an AI system versus the people who are playing. Just so. One that can be tested if you release it on Steam Early Access, you can test that quite easily for local co-op and have the other team be filled by AI, and you can test it in-house quite easily as well, because then you can just have us 4 play the game for a session, see if it works, go back, work on it, come back again. Or if it's online, it'll be a bit more difficult at the short term.
I got one more. Have you thought about potentially adding in more of a reward system? Because it's like, what am I getting out of all this other than throwing bricks and balls at kids? So like
bricks and balls.
Took the bricks out, Alice. So
like, what is it that exactly you're going to be getting? You're going to be like get cosmetic items.
Yeah. So
you get like cosmetic items from certain like achievements.
Yeah. So I was thinking of that, but this would be again a long-term goal if everything's completed. Because I know a few games that have online, like a game, I think it was Crab Game. That game was released, and then once it was released, they started developing these cosmetics for leveling up.
Yeah.
So I think that would be the plan. Where once everything's done and we know this can be released, either release it on early access or start working on cosmetics for rewards, just so the people who do play a lot have rewards for it. But if you've just released it, there's not going to be those people yet. So there's not really the biggest worry when it's released instantly. We could always reward them with like coins or something. They don't do anything for a bit, or work on those cosmetics, which I think would work quite well for a long-term goal.
Yeah, that's fine.
Any more questions?
Would you have any kind of like you've got a class system with different characters? Would you have abilities that you could change and like that could do different things, buffs or otherwise, passive abilities that could be within each class different, or
there could be, but with that then is because the 2 adults are the same basically. There's like slight differences where like one move is slightly different because it's like it's like a couple. They would have to have abilities that they always have. And then those kids' abilities have to be balanced and not completely dominate a 2-player team. So if you have an ability that knocks someone down, you just won, really. So it's a bit iffy with that. Whereas the stat differences with like throw speed and things like that, I think that would do quite well in making the characters feel different, because then you would have one big guy who you would provide stuff with, who just chucks stuff at people.
Some more basic buffs.
Yeah, basic stat buffs, stat reduces, things like that.
Or just have like the big guy have like a buff where it's just return to sender. So when
So like 4, it bounces into them. Could always go for passive things like that, but I don't think abilities will be. Unless there's interest, obviously, once it's released, or we're working on it. If it really feels boring not having any abilities, but I don't think it would be necessary, really. Any more questions about my kids throwing rocks at people?
Would you have any kind of like different modes?
Different modes?
So you've got a standard mode, but is there any kind of like spicy modes that would just kind of like switch up the game?
Not even mind, because I don't want to add a upside down mode.
Nothing wrong with that.
One that might be worth thinking about
I
it.
reckon you could add like a scavenger mode where it allows the people to go from one side of the fence to the other to rob like different
That'd be quite cool.
objects.
Yeah, like a collect rather than fighting each other throwing rocks.
Yeah.
You pick up rocks from the opposite team. That would work quite well.
Yeah.
Then you could have because then you could have the kids going into their garden taking stuff and the adults trying to stop it.
Yeah.
That would work quite well.
Yeah.
Just problem with that, you'd have to make it so it fits the 2 versus 4 or children versus adult team thing work. That would work with that sort of thing, but there's not a lot of options I can think of that work with that. So you could always have 1 or 2 if we think of any.
One option that I was thinking of, which Jack interrupted me on,
it was a good idea. It was a good idea.
is like see how fast you can trash up the house. Without the parents being there, it's just the kids and it's just the house, and they have to see how fast they can cause as much damage as they possibly can.
That would work, but the issue is you'd have to then make the inside of the house.
No, it's just the outside. So the outside would just constantly just get damaged.
So you're just chucking stuff at a wall.
And windows, and you got the.
So like smashing windows and everything.
It'd be.
That again might be morally wrong because you literally do like vandalism.
Yeah. Well, to be fair, the initial one isn't much different, but I would also argue that would get boring very quick. Throwing rocks at a wall.
It's vandalism.
Yeah. Again, as I said.
No, that's not the idea. Yeah.
There could be things, but you'd have to weigh it in with that sort of gameplay scheme.
I don't think the vandalism part would be a big issue because I mean, like Hello Neighbour,
it's cartoon.
He plays a kid and it's a cartoony game, and you can pick up
and I
rocks
like
and
it
throw
play
that out
COD
the window.
and
He usually
I don't
plays
see a
the
lot of
baby and his. They're trying to escape at the front door.
It is very good. Anyway, any more questions? No more questions? Ghost Man?
Oh wait.
Cool. Okay.
There's one more. So in terms of level design, have you thought about like adding a slide and that in?
So again, this will be a long time goal. Once everything's done, different versions of the house garden would be made.
Yeah.
So modules, so it can be switched up. Similar to yours with your house, with your modular house. So the house could be changed for like a red house or a green house or things like that.
Yeah.
Have slightly different positions of stuff. Same with the back garden. Could be items in there, different items, different bumps, different items that look quite nice. It could be a slide. Probably wouldn't do anything, but you could always have a slide to make it look visually different. Stuff like that.
Yeah, because I was thinking that you could like get the objects and then throw it further on the slide, so it's gives you a bit more
height
range.
advantage.
Yeah, so it doesn't encourage that backseat gaming sort of thing. Where people just sit back at the back of the house and just try and avoid getting hit or anything.
The problem with that one is it would then provide a random advantage, which I'm not a fan of. So then you could just randomly get a massive pyramid on your side and be like, okay, we just won then. Well, the other person has like a hill where they just get pelted with.
You could to counteract that. You could have stuff like that on both sides. Like I have a trampoline on the adult side. You could bounce.
Yeah, I guess that
target.
That could mix up the gameplay a bit. Good idea.